time for us to get started. And I want to welcome each of you as you have joined this space on Zoom from across the country and world, actually. I'm Ruth Roselle, Director of the Buttrey Center for Peace and Nonviolence. And on behalf of Central Seminary and the Buttrey Center, I want to welcome you and express my delight and gratitude that you have made time in your busy life to be a part of this Zoom series, Creation Care in a Changing Climate, Doing Our Part to Reduce Greenhouse Gas Emissions. Today, we're going to focus on advocacy for clean energy. Before we get started, I want to remind you to please mute yourself so as not to disturb others unless you are talking or asking a question. We will be recording the session so that those who are unavailable right now can view it at a later time. And when that recording is available, it'll be posted on the Buttrey Center webpage on Central Seminary's website and then shared to the Buttrey Center Facebook page. Feel free to put your name and place and briefly any other information you'd like to share in the chat. As we go along, if there are questions that you would like us to address during the last part of today's sessions, it would be helpful if you would please put those in the Q&A. I'm not much of an online multitasker, so I may not be following the chat if it gets very busy, and so may not catch questions that you put in the chat. So go ahead and please put those in the Q&A if there are things you'd like to ask Dorothy after she's made her presentation. Our presenter today is Dorothy Barnett, who is Executive Director of the Climate and Energy Project, which is a Kansas-based, nonpartisan 501c3 nonprofit that is driving solutions for an equitable transition for a clean energy future. Under Dorothy's leadership, CEP holds the vision of a healthy and resilient Kansas with flourishing communities, equitable access to clean energy, robust civil participation, and policies that protect our people and planet to ensure a thriving and just future. Goals and a vision that I think we can easily embrace as wonderful ones. Dorothy has coordinated winning campaigns to protect the Kansas Renewable Portfolio Standard from special interest group attacks during 4 legislative sessions, allowing the wind industry to grow to 40% or more maybe now of the state's power generation in just a decade. She provides expert testimony at regulatory proceedings and has been published in the Electricity Journal. Dorothy received her education at Friends University. In my efforts to figure out how to be involved in effective action in the face of our climate crisis, I have found that Dorothy and the team she leads at CEP are knowledgeable, fact-based, and effective in helping to move forward the development of clean energy. I have learned a great deal about the importance of engaging in advocacy for clean energy at the local level and how to go about doing so from Dorothy, and I am eager to have her share with you some of her knowledge and expertise in this area. Although her work is here in Kansas, I am sure what she has to say will have relevance to whatever state you may be zooming in from. But before she does that, I want to share some theological perspectives that relate to what Dorothy will be sharing with us about advocacy for clean energy. As a pastoral theologian, I feel it's important that we pay attention both to our biblical and theological wisdom and to contemporary scientific knowledge, and in valuing both of these to move forward with better practices to live out our faith. Throughout the biblical witness to God is the foundational belief that God is the creator and sustainer of all that is. Many passages in the scriptures celebrate God's creation of the earth and all of its creatures, as well as the way that the world is ordered such that it supports life. In Genesis 8:22, such order is expressed as being seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night. Two aspects of God's wondrous creation important for this ordering are the sun as a source of light and heat, and the wind with its important role in weather patterns. Also in the scriptures, there are many expressions of reliance on God for the basic provisions of food and water for humans and all living beings. There are expressions of deep gratitude for God's awareness and response to every different living creature's needs in the web of life, such as we see in Psalm 104. Although energy may not be explicitly mentioned as a human need, it is one that we now recognize as necessary for heating, cooling, cooking, getting around, and producing the many things that we use. And God's creation provides for this as well. The sun's light continuously reaches the Earth's surface with energy that is 10,000 times more than what the whole world uses. In fact, the Earth receives more solar energy in 1 hour than humanity uses in a year. And atmospheric scientists indicate that just 2% of Earth's wind could power all civilization. These clean sources of energy are essentially limitless and can be harnessed in solar panels and wind turbines. Fueling the industrial age and used in increasingly greater amounts since the 1950s, fossil fuel, that is coal and oil and natural gas, have powered our economy and now are woven into every aspect of our lives. They provide 84% of global energy. But increasingly, we are now understanding that not only do they cause great human suffering, what I have read is that over 8 million people globally die prematurely each year from the pollution of toxins and particulate matter. But they also have disrupted the carbon cycle, an aspect of creation's design that is critical for life. The Earth has been able to support life because in the atmosphere, just the right amount of greenhouse gases, including carbon dioxide, have held in just the right amount of warmth from the sun. This delicate balance has been maintained by plants and trees and marine phytoplankton capturing carbon and then putting it deep within the earth, carbon that would later become fossil fuels. But with a great increase in burning fossil fuels, releasing millions of tons of carbon dioxide pollution into the atmosphere every day, this delicate balance has been disrupted, so that more of the sun's solar radiation is being trapped within the Earth's atmosphere, leading to global warming and climate change. When we understand this aspect of creation's design that supports life is being disrupted and destructive climate changes are resulting, it becomes ever more clear that to continue on the path of using fossil fuels for energy is simply wrong, especially when there are other sources of energy readily available. Whereas the scientists of fossil fuel companies have known for many decades that the release of carbon dioxide would cause global warming, most of us have only recently begun to understand this. We have not knowingly participated in the destruction of creation, but now that we know, we are responsible to change. We must change our way of living to be more in harmony with nature and creation's design by transitioning away from using fossil fuels to using clean sources of energy. This is what climate scientists are telling us needs to be done as rapidly as possible. And fortunately, humanity has the knowledge to do this, but it will require all of us doing our part to make that transition. And that is why I'm so happy that Dorothy is with us today to help us better understand how we can be involved in encouraging and advocating for solar and wind energy so that we can transition away from using fossil fuels. So Dorothy, welcome to this space, and we are eager to hear what you have to say.
Thank you so much, Ruth. I'm excited to be here with you. I'm going to get set up with my presentation and give me a thumbs up if you can see it okay. That work okay? Wonderful. Well, thank you again for inviting me to join you today. I have so enjoyed working with Ruth and have appreciated her advocacy. I see a couple of familiar faces, and I'm happy to meet the rest of you. Ruth already did an introduction of me, and so I won't go there. But I want to start with kind of setting the stage a little bit. Ruth did this somewhat, but as you all know, climate change is the defining challenge of our time. It's inextricably linked to our health, to our environment, and to our communities. We all need clean air to breathe and water to drink. We need a fair and thriving economy and a safe and secure country. Climate change and the pollution that causes it threatens all of that and more, putting not only our health and well-being at risk, but also hitting hardest those who can least afford it or who least contributed to it. It exasperates racial, gender, and class inequality. We know that solutions exist to build resilience, economic opportunities, and healthy communities. And Kansas, where I live and work, as well as the world, have enormous potential for effective climate action. Climate change is here today, reshaping our world in ways big and small, but that doesn't mean that our future is predetermined. We still have the ability to limit further warming to help communities, not only here in Kansas, but around the world, adapt to the changes that have already occurred. Every fraction of a degree counts. As Ruth said, we must accelerate the global transition to clean energy and reach net zero emissions as soon as possible. We also need to remove some of the carbon that's already in the air. That means changing the way we manage farmland so it can retain more carbon. This important science guides all of our work at the Climate and Energy Project. So Ruth told you a little bit about our organization. My hope tonight is to share with you our approach to advocacy and to share a little bit about the way we work to build power and to encourage people to take climate action. And I'm going to do that by sharing with you a little bit of information about our programs. Then I'll talk about wind and solar in our state, and we'll kind of touch on what are some things that folks can do wherever they are to advocate for the clean energy economy. So, because the work we do incorporates systems-based approaches and intentionally strives to do equitable solutions, it requires much more collaboration with organizations and service areas. We have lots of partners that we work with. So when I talk about this kind of systems-based approach, what does that look like in real time? Sometimes the work takes longer. We need to slow down and listen to our partners and to the people who are impacted by the changing climate. The opportunities that we have to arise from this work and this kind of collaboration really results in long-term sustainability in various initiatives that I'll share with you, some new kinds of ideas and new approaches that really you only can get if you move into that deep collaboration. So the work that we do at CEP can be divided into 4 main buckets, and I'll touch on the first 3 briefly before talking more about clean energy and advocacy in that space. But we do climate resiliency, civic participation, policy work, and then programming and policy around clean energy. Our climate resilience work centers around what we call our wealth work, which preserves and prioritizes our water, energy, air, land, transportation, and health. Right now, the Wealth Collaborative is the Kansas Wealth State Table, and the participating organizations work together toward a common goal and work on strategies for a resilient and healthy communities. We set inclusive, coordinated, and intentional strategies that drive equitable climate and energy policies. One of those things we were working on recently together was pulling together public comments for a utility rate case. The REAMP network is made up of 9 Midwestern states that all have the same North Star goal to equitably eliminate greenhouse gas emissions in the Midwest by 2050. The network provides Kansans, environmental and social justice organizations a greater platform to be able to collaborate and professional development opportunities on climate and energy issues for Kansas. We have about 12 organizations that are part of our Kansas Wealth REAMP state table. The Kansas Climate and Health Declaration, which can be found at resilientkansas.org, is a project of the Wealth Collaborative. The idea is to increase awareness of the impacts on climate change and public health, to increase civic engagement on climate action in our state, and to advance policies that build community resilience and safeguard the future of our state from climate disruption. On the Kansas Climate and Health Declaration, we have 42 organizational signers so far, and 700 individual signers. And so if you're a Kansan, please take a look at resilientkansas.org to find that declaration. When we think about civic participation, we really focus that on 4 areas. Much of our community engagement focuses on civic participation. And so that programming starts with what we call integrated voter engagement. It includes our Kansas Climate Corps, our Kansas Environmental Leadership, and something we call social cohesion. We did a lot of work during the pandemic to encourage people to mask up and get vaccinated as a way to try to bring a little bit of health into our wealth work. The Climate Corps, which stands for Community Organizing for Resilience and Equity, that goal is to increase voter awareness and engagement on the links between health, climate resilience, equity, and energy. We do that work with a lot of different partner organizations. We do some get out the vote work with phone banking and something we call relational organizing, which is really just getting friends and family to make sure that they're registered to vote and that they're voting for people who share their values. Ruth mentioned that we're a 501c3. We don't support individual candidates. We don't tell people who to vote for, but we do encourage them to exercise civic participation by getting out and voting. We do voter education, talking to people about, again, finding groups that share your values, people who share your values to be able to vote for them. We also do community engagement and leadership. When we think about policy, we do most of our policy work through our Clean Energy Business Council. The Clean Energy Business Council is a network of companies and organizations who are all working to expand opportunities for renewable energy and energy efficiency as practical solutions for economic growth. One of the things that you may not think about a lot is not everybody wants to talk about or understands where we're headed from a climate perspective. But nearly everyone will talk about economic benefits of the transition to clean energy. And so through a business lens, through a business voice, sometimes that's easier to reach policymakers. And so we created the Clean Energy Business Council. We do work at the Kansas Corporation Commission. Depending upon where you live, your utilities are likely overseen by a Public Utilities Commission. We call ours the Kansas Corporation Commission. They're responsible for setting rates and programs that our investor-owned utilities offer. So we intervene in rate cases. We're just wrapping up, as I mentioned, a case for one of our large investor-owned utilities. We spent a lot of time and worked with partners advocating for energy efficiency programs for that same utility. So we spend a lot of time at the Kansas Corporation Commission, encouraging people to make public comments as well as providing expert testimony. We also do some work at the legislative session. As I mentioned, most of that work is through the Clean Energy Business Council. But we really work to provide legislative updates and action alerts to keep people aware of what kind of activities are happening at the State House. Last year and the year before, there was a lot of anti-clean energy legislation that was being proposed by some legislators who, through willful ignorance or maybe through a not understanding really about clean energy, to try to stop the growth of renewable energy as a climate solution for Kansas. And so part of our work was letting people know what was happening and encouraging them to reach out to their legislators to support clean energy. The other piece that we do is also to engage at the federal level. We don't have anyone in DC, but a lot of our partner organizations do. And so we try to keep abreast and advocate as we can for federal policies that will make a difference in climate policy at the bigger level. More and more, we find ourselves working at the local level, and I'll talk more about that as we move forward. Clean energy, we work with solar, both rooftop, community, as well as utility scale solar. We have for more than 15 years been an expert on wind energy, both how it works and what the opportunities are, health and safety. We started out, I think when I met Noni, one of the things we were doing was working on an energy efficiency challenge to encourage communities to save energy. And then again, our Clean Energy Business Council. Sorry, my wanting to just jump around by itself. One of the things about energy efficiency that I think is important, we don't often talk about or think about that as a climate solution. But really, when we think about using less energy, trying to conserve energy, that really makes an impact on people who are experiencing what we call a high energy burden. It also helps us by using less polluting energy. I'm going to share a little bit about where Kansas is on wind and solar, but energy efficiency, we really have been lacking over the last number of years. One of the programs that we are just standing up this year around energy efficiency is a new program that we're calling Energy Navigators. This project is going to provide training and resources to community-based health workers to help them identify opportunities for people they serve to access funding from the Biden administration to be able to weatherize their homes. There, through the Inflation Reduction Act, there is a lot of funding that's going to be available, particularly for people of low income, to get upfront rebates on more up-to-date appliances that are healthier for them, to be able to provide some transition from fossil gas appliances to electric appliances, rebates for insulation. So we're really excited about this Energy Navigator program, and we hope to learn this month that we were selected for a Department of Energy's Buildings Up Prize to help get that program off the ground. So going on to wind, Kansas is a leader in wind energy production, and we have plenty of opportunity to grow. Ruth, today we have over 50% of our total electricity use in Kansas powered by wind, and we have reduced emissions in the power sector more than 40% in the last 15 years. You can see that Kansas, 4% of our electricity use, it comes from, we're number 4th in the country for the amount of wind we use as a percentage of our total generation. We're number 3 in corporate wind purchases. It's not just utilities that are buying wind power, but Kansas supplies Target and many other, Google, Facebook, other groups with wind power. We have the 4th most wind power installed in the United States. We kind of trade back and forth with Iowa and Oklahoma. The financial investment that has been made to install all the wind energy is more than $15 billion. And the power is the equivalent of 2.6 million homes powered by wind energy. This is a map with operational and under construction wind farms and related businesses. This has not been updated since 2021. And since then, there has been a 600 megawatt wind farm is under construction up here in Republic and Washington County. We have different businesses. I live in Hutchinson, Kansas. We have a wind turbine manufacturer here in Hutchinson. There are companies in Wichita, down in Southeast Kansas, and in other parts of the Northeast and the Northwest that all service the wind industry in Kansas. One of the things that we talk about are the Kansas counties that host wind farms. And again, this is a little bit out of date because it doesn't show Republic and Washington County, but more than 30 Kansas counties are reaping the economic benefits of hosting wind energy. One of the things that we talk about is, that I will talk about a little bit, is the kind of misinformation that is shared and has started to get more prevalent around the United States about the impacts of renewable energy. And one of the things that we are grateful for as it relates to wind energy is when someone starts talking about health impacts or safety impacts, we can point to these 44 operational wind farms in 30 counties and say, it's not happening here. And so if someone brings forth a report that talks about something happening in another country, you know, we can number one say, is that a peer-reviewed study? Is that science-based information? But also, you know, talk about the experiences of the people right here in Kansas. As it relates to solar, the Climate and Energy Project, along with our Clean Energy Business Council members, have been leading the charge to fight against unfair solar policies that started back in 2015 with our Save Kansas Solar campaign. Additionally, as utility scale solar continues to grow, we're providing more and more education to county commissioners and to planning commissions as they work on solar regulations. We also continue to advocate with those same organizations for fair regulations that will allow solar to grow. So although Kansas is known as a leader in wind power, with over 50% of our in-state generation coming from those 44 wind farms across the state, what you may not know is that we also have the potential to be a leader in solar power. We have a top 10 solar resource, and parts of our state have more sunny days than Florida. I mentioned that we've been hosting virtual and in-person education events about solar, utility scale solar for the last couple of years, along with battery storage. As the price of solar continues to drop, more and more counties are being approached by solar developers to consider hosting large solar arrays. Many of our counties have either outdated or no regulations that are available for utility scale solar. Some don't have any regulations as it relates to rooftop solar either, but those impacts are less. And so we've been hosting a lot of different events, both in person and online, to try to help people have an understanding of where solar energy is going. I mentioned the cost of renewables, and one of the things I would say is that over the past decade, the cost of utility scale solar power has dropped exponentially. And today, wind energy and solar PV are the lowest cost of electricity generation, even compared to coal plants that have been completely depreciated. The cost of solar PV at the utility scale and wind energy is even lower than that. One of the things that we hear, even though it is getting more affordable, more cost effective, that it's more cost effective for ratepayers, for utility customers, if the utility isn't investing more in renewable energy because their fuel is free. You don't pay for the wind, you don't pay for the solar. Even despite that, it is getting more difficult to site large-scale renewable energy projects. And it's not just more difficult to site projects in more populated areas. It's gotten more difficult really to site large renewable energy projects and other projects anywhere across the state and in a lot of places across the country. So there's been a lot of investigative reporting lately on what's been happening in wind and solar space, talking about siting renewable energy. The New York Times, NPR, and most recently, a couple of online journalists, Michael Thomas and Emily Atkin, who write for Distilled, we're digging into who is funding this misinformation and how that information is spread through social media and professional looking websites. And it's really filled with misinformation. Here in Kansas, we've seen anti-renewable energy and misinformation spread by elected officials, along with others, which is another reason why we've been trying to really get out into the community and answer questions and point people into the direction of science and fact-based information to really help quell some of the things that they're hearing from other sources. Not only is misinformation spreading, but at a time when we need the most climate action, we're seeing climate denialism grow in our state. The latest intergovernmental panel on climate change report makes clear that risk to humans and nature accelerate with every additional fraction of a degree of warming. Camille Parmesan, an ecologist at the University of Texas, Austin, and one of the researchers who worked on that recent report, said one of the most striking conclusions in our report is that we're seeing the adverse impacts that are much more widespread and much more negative than we expected. And so we know that climate action is necessary, and we know that not only do we need to speak up, but we need to be empowering people to have information that they can use that is science-based and factual. One of the things that we often hear from even people who would consider themselves environmentalists is that we don't need to take up a bunch of our land, a bunch of our rural communities and disrupt the rural character. We should just do rooftop solar on everything. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we are huge advocates for rooftop solar. We've spent a lot of time, a lot of money. We've done a lot of advocacy to ensure that people have fair and equitable pricing for their solar. But if you think about the average residential solar system in Kansas is about 10 kilowatts. You would need 20,000 roofs to equal one average utility scale solar array. And we just don't have time for that now. We have to scale up this decade. So what is our role? One of the things that we really try to talk with folks about is letting your decision makers know, whether that's at the local level, at the state level, or at the federal level, that you want regulations and decision making to happen based on science. You don't want it based on a website that people go to and see that someone says wind energy causes cancer. You want to be looking at government and education resources that will talk to you about what kinds of health and safety measures need to be taken. You also want to let your decision makers know that the majority actually supports renewable energy and climate change mitigation. Unfortunately, people who are against something are often the ones who turn out. They're the ones who will call or write or show up at a public meeting to rail against a technology or against a company. And in reality, most people, polling shows that most people, even in Kansas, support expanding renewable energy. But it's those folks who think, well, I vote, I go to the polls, I elect good people. They're going to do the right thing as it relates to climate action. But what their policymakers are doing is hearing from people misinformation, disinformation, and it's hard for them to not be influenced by that. And the other piece that we think is really important is to let your decision makers know that we expect them not to compromise with misinformation. And what I mean by that is sometimes you will have people come to planning commission meetings and they will say, we want 1.5 miles setback for renewable energy from anything from that wind farm because we think that it's going to be dangerous. And so instead of taking fact-based information from turbine manufacturers or from organizations like Lawrence Berkeley Lab, who's done a lot of research on wind energy, or the National Renewable Energy Lab, or the Department of Energy. They will just say, well, we want to try and make everybody happy, so let's just split the baby and do half that distance in our regulations. And that really is compromising with misinformation. Information says 1.5 times the turbine height is the standard that regulation should qualify. A lot of times people will come to the meetings and they recognize that a 1.5 mile setback means no wind energy is going to be built in their county, and that's okay. That's why they're suggesting that kind of a setback. So, less traditional advocacy. These are things that might be a little harder to do, but that we have found to be quite effective. Write a letter to the editor. It doesn't have to be long. You don't have to be an expert. You can talk about the things that matter to you and encourage others to do the same. Share your thoughts with your family and friends. As we began to talk more and more about utility scale solar, it was really interesting that folks were really not talking about climate to their friends and family, not really talking about the technology. People weren't very informed about what kinds of regulations were being talked about. And so just sharing your thoughts with your friends and family and asking what they think about the different technologies or what questions they have that maybe you know an answer to can be a really key way advocacy. Think about hosting an educational event with a nonprofit who knows the issues. We've been really fortunate that Ruth has arranged for us to speak to different groups that she's involved with. We have partners that have done that. We've had planning commissions invite us to come and to talk about some of those things. So think about who are the nonprofits in your communities or in your states that might know these issues, that could be a trusted voice. And then really kind of a newest type of less traditional advocacy that we've been doing is working to create videos to share with policymakers. Sometimes it's easy for a policymaker to dismiss a form letter or to dismiss a phone call, but a video where they recognize your face as a constituent can be really very impactful. And I want to share a video that highlights a campaign that we did around solar last year. For those of you who have seen this, I apologize. It's about 3 minutes, but would love to share it with you and give you some ideas of some things you might be able to do in your own neighborhoods.
Most Americans want more renewable energy and agree that addressing climate change is important. But progress is often met with opposition from fossil fuel industry groups with unlimited resources and a vested interest to keep the status quo. In 2022, the Climate and Energy Project, or CEP, achieved a solar zoning victory in Kansas against great odds. CEP helped citizens win zoning changes that will allow utility-scale solar in rural Johnson County, Kansas.
Our normal approach to advocacy is to find common ground. In this case, there was overwhelming support from residents and businesses in Johnson County, but we were up against some powerful opposition. Our best tools were the voices of ordinary citizens delivered in a powerful way to the County Commission using a unique video tool called JOG.
A large energy developer had already secured land leases and landowner partnerships for a utility-scale solar project near Gardner, just southwest of the Kansas City metro. This became a battleground when an alliance of powerful political operatives and wealthy fossil fuel groups was determined to stop any future solar projects. They wanted to set a precedent that made the entire state off limits to further renewable energy development. In spring 2022, the Johnson County Board of Commissioners held meetings to review zoning recommendations drafted by those fossil fuel interests that were designed to make solar development impossible. CEP partnered with other community organizations to help residents express their support for utility-scale solar. The goal was to convince the county commissioners to reject unnecessarily restrictive zoning designed to prohibit solar development in the county and instead adopt reasonable regulations that would allow utility-scale solar to move forward. 3 community events were held to inform and educate advocacy partners. During those events, CEP used JOG to capture residents' comments on video. Here's a small sampling of the nearly 100 video clips that were later sent to the Board of Commissioners.
I very much support the solar development in Johnson County. There's oil development out there, there's natural gas, there's intermodal, there's all kinds of land uses. Please don't put unreasonable restrictions on solar.
I know there is great appetite in my community for solar, which means we must rely on utility-scale subscription programs. These require proximate solar installations, which we just don't have.
My name's Susan Alig, and I'm a Prairie Village mom, and today I'm asking you to say yes to solar. I want to do everything I can to make sure that my children have a livable climate.
It's also a matter of equity, whether you're at the bottom of the rung financially or if you're at the top. You need to have alternatives that help reduce your costs and help you have a lower energy burden.
Hi, my name's April Snay. I think I speak for many young people and that I value communities that invest in the sustainable future, and I hope that Johnson County embraces that.
I'm Rabbi Moti Reber. I believe that one of the most pressing moral issues of our time is the challenge of human-caused climate disruption. If Johnson County puts on regulations to discourage solar, that would send a signal to the rest of the state, and we can't let that happen.
Using JOG, CEP gathered citizen videos, quickly identified the most compelling comments, edited them into short clips, and sent them to the county commissioners. The faces and voices of constituents were powerful and successful. On 2 separate occasions, the commissioners voted down zoning restrictions that would prohibit solar development, both times by a 6-to-1 margin. Instead, they passed zoning favorable to solar development.
Of course, we were thrilled with the outcome of this process. It's a real-life example of ordinary citizens speaking their mind and being heard on an issue that's important to them. And JOG gave us the ability to make that happen efficiently and effectively.
By amplifying the voices of Johnson County citizens, CEP helped win an important climate victory for the people of Johnson County and the entire state of Kansas.
So that is an example of some pretty unusual advocacy efforts, but we have continued to see it be valuable, and we continue to use it in other campaigns. To meet the climate crisis that we're facing, the IEA's Net Zero by 2050 report calls for scaling up solar and wind rapidly this decade, reaching annual additions of 630 gigawatts of solar PV and 390 gigawatts of wind by 2030. Essentially 4 times the record level set in 2020. For solar PV, this is equivalent to installing the world's current largest solar park roughly every day for the next 10 years. We have the solutions we need, but we need to have everyone who supports the transition to clean energy active at all levels of government. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, but I just want to say thank you to all of you for making this issue a priority for the future of my grandchildren, of yours, and of our planet. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dorothy, for sharing with us. So now we have a few minutes to ask questions or have discussion. And I see that Jerry has raised his hand. Dorothy, I wonder if you want to take down the PowerPoint, and then we can see people. Great, we can see people's faces. We're a pretty small group, so we can have kind of some conversation. Jerry, why don't you?
I recently read a headline somewhere where I thought it said that the commissioners had instituted a moratorium on utility scale solar in Johnson County. Did I misread that headline?
I think you misread it, Jerry. Not at this point, they haven't.
Is there a
There hasn't
movement?
been, I'm sorry?
Is there a movement in that direction after this victory we had?
Not that I'm aware of, but there hasn't been a conditional use permit filed yet in Johnson County. And so I'm certain that we will see a movement. But at this point, nothing is moving or being discussed about that in Johnson County. Jerry, you mentioned, rooftop solar. I agree wholeheartedly. We should be doing everything we can to ensure that rooftop solar is available. The state of Kansas and the Kansas Housing Resources Corporation is applying for a Solar for All grant through the Department of Energy that we are hoping to advise on, that would encourage them to help particularly marginalized community members weatherize their homes through the programs that are available that way, and then put small solar arrays on their roofs in order to help them lower their energy bills overall. There's also another project that is a bi-state project in Missouri and Kansas that the Metropolitan Energy Center is leading. The city of Kansas City, Missouri is a part of it, as well as several others, to do a similar Solar for All application that will help with rooftop solar. So yes, and it's not enough fast enough on that regard.
Yeah, I was recently in a webinar where somebody emphasized the importance of putting roofs over all the parking lots that take up space and using that as a way to help accelerate rooftop solar.
Yeah,
And
I think great idea. Yeah, great idea. I'm not sure our utilities would go for it. Right now, we have some limitations on how much solar can be net metered in our state, at least. So we'll see how that pans out in the next legislative session.
So there's a need for advocacy in that area as well, right?
Absolutely.
In order to
Absolutely.
do that kind of thing.
I see Joel has a hand up.
Yeah, I had I promise I'm going to put a question mark on the end of this, but so I kind of understand that if you really want to get something done on climate, like individual decisions aren't super important, like one electric car doesn't matter or one thing on the, but where it sort of matters is you convince other people that it's valuable, right? So it's like, no, my electric car is not stupid and it's faster than yours, and so on and so forth, right? So it's some ways more of a way to change minds than it is that the actual total amount of carbon you're actually stopping by your climate emittable thing. So I've always thought with rooftop solar, this seemed like a really great way to sort of prove that it works. And I've always thought like, so I'm in kind of a rural church, and I have lots of people in my church that think solar's, not real and doesn't work and so on and so forth. And I always thought, well, if you could get a way that they would just have it, and then that way they would, this would be a mind change, right? This is a huge mind change. But the problem is the cost of solar, 50% of the cost is installation. Installation is just this huge cost problem. This is why it's so much cheaper in Australia, because they just have a such slicker system to be able to do everything and install it, cheaper. And so I always kind of wondered, like, as a way to do things besides just run around and complain, or not complain, but try to tell people in your church that aren't going to listen to you, you should do this, right? Which doesn't work. If you actually installed some solar and you had, as a ministry, you did the installation, you could cut the cost in half. Of course, you have to pay an electrician to come look at it or whatever, but like putting it on the roof isn't rocket science. And I just thought that would be really great. Not so much because the amount of carbon you would remove from the air prevent, but just the mind change that you would have by they don't have an electric bill anymore. And anyway, this is my idea, and I'm going to let you shoot me down on why this is like probably not that good of idea, since you have a lot more experience than I do.
I'm not going to shoot you down, actually. There's a lot of research that shows when people are exposed to solar and their neighbors talk about it, they are more inclined to consider it for themselves. So there's research that shows that. So I was fortunate enough to be on an installation in a low-income community in California several years ago, and talking to the homeowner who was talking about how excited they were about getting solar through this project, and then how they had been talking with their neighbors, and now, you know, half a dozen of their neighbors also were going to try to get solar on their house. So it does work. So I'm not going to shoot you down there. You're exactly right. What I will tell you is it is much more cost effective for churches, houses of worship today, to go solar than it was even a year ago. As a part of the Inflation Reduction Act, President Biden made the tax credits that used to be only available to people with a tax appetite refundable. And so nonprofits like churches or schools or hospitals can now get 30% of their solar project in a refund from the government, from Treasury. Now, there's still a little bit of paperwork around how's that going to work, and, you know, making sure that all your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed in order to access that. But that will make a huge impact for churches right off the bat, being able to get 30% of their solar array paid for.
But even then, it's like a 10-year RO, return on
Hold
investment,
on,
right?
hold on. If your facility is in marginalized, identified low-income community, you get a 10% adder to that. So now you're talking 40%. If you are within a certain miles of a fossil plant, you can get another 10%. If you are committed to using domestic content, so panels and equipment made in the US, you can get an even bigger piece of the pie. And so there are opportunities to reduce by 50 or more percent the cost of solar for houses of worship. And so I think that's a really exciting opportunity. And you're right, a lot of it is labor. We work with an organization here in Kansas called FREAK. That is the Flint Hills Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Cooperative. And they work with individuals and with churches and others on a barn raising model, where they buy panels in bulk. And then they work with people to do self-installs, and then they have electricians come and hook things up and sign off on the project. So there are ways to do this, and I would encourage you to keep thinking about it. We're trying to get more details and information to be able to share with nonprofits and with churches. The one caveat to that is, in Kansas, there are size limits to how much you can net meter. And so if you need a size bigger than 100 kW, you can only net meter a certain portion of that. We are currently, through our Clean Energy Business Council, working on some legislation to change that, to expand that size limit. But currently 100 kW is all that can be net metered here in Kansas. So I think you're on the right track, but some more work to do.
And by saying that, Dorothy, I think what you're saying is that they could still do it, but they wouldn't receive as much payback of their extra energy.
From the utility, yes.
Yes. It'd be more of a parallel metering.
Yeah, more parallel generation.
But
which is doable, but not as lucrative, and it can make the payback longer than it really should be.
Some more advocacy area, yeah.
Absolutely. Are there others besides Jerry with another question? No offense, Jerry, but we'll let somebody else. Sang, do you have something?
Thank you very much for your sharing. Dorothy Barnett. I I hear about you are sharing the CEP project in Kansas. I am comparing my Michina. I said you say about that in every day 2,000 megawatt we use the energy. 2,000 megawatt we use the energy in Kansas. In Michina, we are using the 10 megawatt energy from the turbine electricity. Yes, we this program is the reduce the gas or oil and solar energy. We use the solar energy. This uh, this program is very relevant around the world. I will introduce our central alumni, Dr. Duko. He is one of the minister NUG. He is the natural resources. This program is around the world. I am very this information. Thank you very much. Yes.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you so much. Ruth, do we have time for one more?
Yeah, I know Jerry has his hand up.
Well, I have more, it's not so much a question. I know some churches that have, in the way of outreach, one example would be they put solar panels on an entryway, and that kind of piqued people's curiosity, and they wanted to know more about a church that was enlightened enough to do that. And another church who puts charging stations in its parking lot where they provide free recharging for people coming off the street. And that is a way of doing outreach, and it may be attracting people into their church.
It's great. That's a great suggestion. I love that.
My church is not enlightened. I have to convince them completely on the money. Completely on the money.
Well, and again, thinking about whether or not you can, do you mind if I ask where you're located?
Paola?
So
south of Kansas City.
Yeah. So your utility is Evergy?
Yep.
So so there are some opportunities, I think, to lower energy cost, even if it's not with a full big system, as we continue to learn more about the Inflation Reduction Act and the funding available to churches. So I would encourage you to sign up for our newsletter at climateandenergy.org. Because as we get more information, we'll be sharing it there. And our hope is to be able to provide, in partnership with KIFA, Kansas Interfaith Action, who's one of our wealth partners, some trainings and some information about how churches can access that funding. We'll have some of our Clean Energy Business Council members participate so they can talk to you about what kinds of things they'll need as they move forward into this process as solar installers. We'll have Freak on to talk about kind of where they're at with that barnstorming, barn raising method, which I love. I think there's a lot of great synergy and opportunity, especially with churches, to think about installing their own, and then maybe helping their parishioners install through Solar for All or another program that we hope to have available in the state.
Yeah, the Freak sounds kind of exactly the type of thing I was interested in, doing, because like Revolve is another group I think I heard about through this and I asked them to look into it, and they basically just said there are no local installers that will provide a like legitimate price in your area. So I pretty much got told, kind of no, and so it seems like the installation is a hurdle.
Things have changed since the IRA came out, so don't give up.
Well,
I might add to my previous comment that to the pastor here that one of the incentives for doing what they did was to attract younger people into their congregation. That's a real problem, I think, among most houses of worship, is attracting the younger generations.
well, we are
It's just,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna say that. I mean, it just the people here don't like solar. It does not matter their age. It's a political thing, and the money will be the only thing that will talk to them, I think.
We are seeing, we are seeing that unfortunately renewable energy has become more of a political marker. And so being able to show where the money is matters. And also, finding what is the key that people will respond to. Is it saving money? Is it concern for the climate? Is it getting younger people into your church? And I didn't mean to interrupt you, sir. I'm sorry.
No problem. My fault. I'm Bob Southard from First Baptist Overland Park, and we installed solar a number of years ago on our roof and have saved a ton of money, and that has been channeled into ministry things. And so, Joel, it wouldn't be that hard for us to share with you facts about how much money we've saved.
It'd be great if I could get a legit bid from anybody at some point and whatnot. I would totally, whenever I have the meeting that tries to suggest, I would be thrilled to have someone who has a church that has experience, especially in their ABC church.
Yeah. Carolyn Predmore.
Have you checked with Cromwell out of Lawrence?
Or Good Energy Solutions. Those are a couple of great companies.
Or Bob Solger's Solar Design Studio.
Yeah.
Village Church has gotten 3 bids last year from those 3.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to jump in here. We are at our time, but also I can see how eager you are to talk about solar on churches, and that actually will be the topic we'll be addressing the next time we meet as well. So I will be cutting short perhaps the discussion today on that, but we will spend more time on that. So I'm grateful for all of your engagement and involvement on that. But as we come to the conclusion of our time together, I want to thank Dorothy for spending this hour with us, sharing your knowledge and your insight. And I think it illustrates that how important it is for us to find a partner in our state and community who is working in the area and very knowledgeable about how to go about advocating for climate energy policies and utility scale. And I know I was so glad to find the Clean Energy Project, CP, and to learn from them, because as you've probably kind of felt, it is a little bit complicated, isn't it? There's a lot to understand and know, and what to do. So CEP is great for the Kansas area, but if you're not zooming in from Kansas, be looking around, and maybe, I don't know if Dorothy has any suggestions for how to find those people in other states, but I think one way to do is just be attending climate action events in your community, and those people are going to show up at some point, and you're going to realize this is a wonderful resource, and someone that will help me know what to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I encourage you to do that. Thanks for each one of you for zooming in, spending this hour with us and being engaged in this subject. I really am grateful for that. In 2 weeks, as I said, on October 18th at 7 p.m., again, same time, we will have our 3rd session in this series that will be focusing on the topic of installing rooftop solar and electrifying everything. Presenters for the evening will be Bill Wood, who is a solar project developer with Cromwell Solar, and has worked some with churches in the area. I know he's worked with Colonial, UCC, and Prairie Village, and I think maybe a couple others as well. Dr. Terrace Roselle will also be joining us. Terry is professor of pastoral theology, ethics, and ministry praxis here at Central Seminary, and he'll share with us both some thoughts from his ethical perspective and also his knowledge as one who researched and oversaw the installation of our rooftop system, solar system, and the electrification of everything in our home. I'm the one who says we need to do this, and he's the one that figures out how to get it done. And so I thought maybe just a homeowner who's gone through this process could be helpful. So next week, we're focusing on rooftop solar and electrifying everything, both for churches and for individual homes, doing our part in all of those areas to get down to net zero greenhouse gas emissions. So I do hope that you will Zoom in again in 2 weeks and join us. But for now, goodbye and good night.
Thank you so much. Nice to see you all.
Thank you, Dorothy.
Bye-bye.